My name is Markus O'Brien-Fehr. I am Councillor John Filion's Chief of Staff. And before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the land we are meeting on, even if virtually, is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Joining me tonight is our panel. We have with us Councillor for Ward 18 Willowdale in the City of Toronto, John Filion. We have Mitch Thibault, who is a Policy Development Officer with the City of Toronto's Municipal Licensing and Standards Department. We have Goldman Chan, also with Municipal Licensing and Standards at the City of Toronto as a Noise Team Supervisor. Staff Sergeant Jonathan Collin, the Community Response Manager of Toronto Police Service 32 Division. Working with us on the back end tonight from our office is Carol Kim and Jesse James. They will be helping me field your questions as we get into the conversation later on tonight. So to start, just want to spend a moment talking about why we're here tonight. And basically it boils down to a number of growing concerns related to noise in busy neighborhoods like ours, especially coming from cars, high performance cars in particular, buzzing around the neighborhood. I think the biggest complaint areas are around Yonge Street, Doris, and Beecroft in particular. I know many of you with us tonight are members of condominium boards or condominium residents that have been dealing with these issues, particularly over the last couple of years. The City of Toronto last updated its noise bylaw in 2019 and was working to address some of these noise issues. There is an update coming back to Council in May, in about a month from now, and then on to Council, which will have some recommendations on addressing some of these issues. We're hoping to speak about that tonight. The report hasn't been finished yet, or at least it hasn't been published yet. So we're hoping to pick the brains of some of the staff that have been working on that report. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the work that the city has done to address other parts of the street racing issue having to do with speeds and enforcement of speed limits, the Vision Zero program, and other city programs related to slowing down vehicles and making our community safer. Toronto Police Service has also been doing quite a bit of work with our community stakeholders, trying to do some more live enforcement in the area, and we will hopefully get a chance to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So to open things up, I will invite our panelists to offer some thoughts in terms of their work on this issue, what they've been seeing, hearing, how they might like to frame the conversation as we get started. And I'm going to ask our councillor, John Filion, to start us off.
Yes, thank you, Markus, and thanks, folks, for joining us tonight. I think our society is getting noisier, and it is getting kind of more sort of psychologically jarring, and certainly a noise that really bothers people is the sound of a car racing. It just feels like in addition to it kind of startling you, it kind of conjures up images of speeding cars and lack of safety, and especially when it wakes you up in the middle of the night, can be really bothersome. And like all, it's a problem that has certainly got worse over the last few years. And like many problems that are new or get worse, it, I think, requires some new solutions, because some of the ones we've had in the past, or the lack of solutions because it wasn't such a big problem, aren't doing the trick. So that's part of what we're exploring tonight. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, John. Goldman Chan, we have with us tonight, who is part of the City of Toronto's Municipal Licensing and Standards Division and a Noise Team Supervisor. Goldman, any thoughts that you want to bring to the table as we kick off the conversation tonight?
Yeah, Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. Yeah, sorry, I've been working since the morning. Yeah, noise is it's in a large city, it does become fairly prominent. So, part of my job here is not just only, I know the topic of the day is vehicle noise, right? That's the vehicle motorcycle noise. But just everything that we have here, also construction noise, which is another big issue. We have loading and unloading, power devices, and I guess another common one would be amplified noise, right? So that's like the bars and restaurants, or your neighbors playing music and all that kind of stuff like that. I do have officers that respond to noise. So all complaints are made via 311. So everything goes through there to make a noise complaint, and then it'll feed to one of my officers. We do have 3 districts. We have East District, which is my district, which I wouldn't really call East. We're pretty much from Bathurst all the way to Scarborough, and then we got the West District, and we kind of got the South District as well too. So we do work rotating shifts. Staff are generally on from 6 o'clock in the morning between different crews until about 2 in the morning. So we do have that coverage that we can. There is what we have already been doing with not was it 32 divisions specifically, but as my colleague Mitch is here as well too. I've been liaising with, for the last 2 years, I've been liaising with Toronto Traffic Services. Okay, so that is the citywide police unit that deals with all the exactly what you think, all the traffic, all the accidents. Those are the ones responding to most of the street vehicle type calls. So within that, we've done a few motorcycle blitzes with them. So motorcycle blitzes for decibel levels of the motorcycles, and along with that, unfortunately, there's no decibels for cars. Okay, but with that being said, there is other HTA issues that the police can use within their powers under the HTA. So I can talk further on that a little bit later. I'll just kind of pass it to the rest of the panel, and then any questions, let me know. Okay.
All right, and Mitch Thibault is working on the policy side of the same division. Mitch, any thoughts from you as we kick things off tonight?
Yeah, for sure. And welcome everyone. Hope everyone's having a great night, and thanks for allowing me to join you today. So as Markus mentioned, I'm a policy development officer with MLS. So I work with the policy and strategic support team to kind of define, the intent of bylaws, to work with Goldman and team to, respond to noise issues and how those are kind of reflected in committee and council reports. So I thought I would just kind of give a bit of context to some of the reporting that we're going to be doing, especially this next coming month, as I know it's of interest. So I think, as kind of Goldman and the councillor alluded to, noise is quite a complex issue, and I think managing and regulating it is a really big undertaking. In Toronto, we have, high volume of construction activity, housing and transportation infrastructure is being built, and it needs to meet the needs of the city. And, with that comes noise. And I think especially at the onset of the pandemic, with people being more at home, they have also noticed more of the noise around their neighborhoods. So as Goldman mentioned, we did do a bylaw review in 2019 that attempted to respond to a bunch of different issues that came up at council and from residents. So we introduced some quantitative limits for specific to amplified sound. We aligned some time constraints between different categories of noise, and also tried to enhance the noise exemption permit process. And those changes came into effect in October of 2019. So as I mentioned, the pandemic has also had a really big effect on how the city regulates noise. There was, periods of time throughout that the province had limited the city's ability to regulate delivery and construction noise, and enforcement resources were also, given to other pockets of the city. So we do plan to do like a more fulsome review of the noise bylaw and all of its changes into 2023, but we do have a report coming in May on some particular outstanding issues. So on two-stroke engine leaf blowers, we also want to discuss vehicle noise and the feasibility of bringing like automated noise equipment to Toronto. So those are kind of the more narrow scope of the report that we're bringing. But I'm looking forward to this discussion today, and of course, happy to take any questions. And if I don't know any answers, I will take them back and get answers for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitch. And up next, I'm going to introduce again Staff Sergeant Jonathan Collin from 32 Division. He is with us still in our participant pool at the moment. So Sergeant Collin, we're going to try to unmute you here and see if that will work in terms of bringing you live to our panel and see if you have any opening thoughts for us.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Fantastic.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't sign on to the panelist sign-on section for some reason. It's not recognizing my email. My name's John Collin. I work in the Community Response Unit at 32 Division. We're situated just off of Yonge Street, just south of Finch. So I understand the complaints of noise in the area because we're right here and I can hear it from my office. We do try our best enforcement-wise in the Yonge Street corridor. We just had a service-wide traffic initiative, speed kills initiative, which excessive noise and aggressive driving was the main focus of it. It was a very successful campaign, and it's good when we can combine our forces at 32 Division with our traffic unit downtown in one area and kind of just focus all our energy on one thing such as that, and ends up, like I say, getting some good results. I'll get more into what we do when it comes to noise and speed and what charges we lay and things like that as we move on. But again, John Collin, 32 Division, Community Response Sergeant, also in charge of the Traffic Enforcement Unit, which is comprised right now of 3 officers.
All right. Sergeant Collin, let me start the discussion with you while we have you live here. Maybe I can touch on 2 questions as it pertains to noise issues in particular and street racing in the community. We've certainly been hearing a lot of complaints since the onset of the pandemic in the councillor's office. From your perspective, have you seen an uptick in that kind of activity? And if so, what sorts of powers do police have to address noise issues of that nature?
So on the Yonge Street corridor, I've been in this office now for about 4 years, and that's always been a constant complaint I've received from residents. I haven't really seen a marked uptick in the complaints that I'm receiving. And again, the best way to get a complaint to us is through our core online reporting system on our Toronto Police website. As far as tools that we have, there are a couple charges under the Highway Traffic Act for noise in particular when it comes to vehicles. Unnecessary noise is the charge that gets laid the most in these cases. It's a little bit of a tricky charge because as it stands now, there's no defined standard of what's too loud. So it's up to the officer's discretion. It's subjective in that sense, which makes it a little trickier, not just to lay the charge, but to proceed with the conviction in court. And the other charge available to us in relation to loud cars is not a proper muffler. So some sort of muffler that's been either tampered with or is damaged in some way, causing it to be louder. And again, officers will inspect that and can lay that charge as well. A little more straightforward in that sense when we can see that something's been done to the vehicle physically. So that's our charges under the HTA. We do have the option of bylaw as well. And I know there's a new bylaw charge just pretty recent for, again, unnecessary noise basically. So that's the our options as far as charges go. Is tool-wise, we don't have any kind of decibel meter or anything like that, which again wouldn't be too helpful because there's no standard as far as what decibel level is not acceptable. So again, it's subjective. If someone's revving their car over and over again and it's very obvious, that's just something that helps our grounds for unnecessary noise.
Okay.
Sorry, and then we run into the issue of, especially on the Yonge Street corridor, we're seeing a lot of high-end vehicles, and I'm talking like race type, like Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and a lot of time these cars are loud, and that's how they come right out of the factory. So that again kind of takes our muffler charge out of the equation, and it, like I said, it's our hands are a little tied right now when it comes to noise offenses. And even identifying which car it is can be tricky, especially here with we have so many condos and buildings here. Sound bounces off everywhere, so the officers can hear it a lot of the times. They just they can't identify the car, and they'll be looking for it. So go ahead. Sorry.
All right. No, I was just going to come back to one other point that you made in terms of having the three officers assigned at 32 Division to traffic issues. So I presume that that unit would be the same tasked with dealing with these sorts of complaints, the same group that would be dealing with any type of traffic enforcement issues across the division. Is that correct?
That's correct. So they get the complaints that are generated through our core system that I mentioned, and other complaints through other means, but they will follow up on it. And again, it's not just Yonge Street or Willowdale, it's throughout the entire 32 Division.
Right. So I guess at the end of the day, there are still fairly scarce resources, human resources, trying to get to a lot of challenges and a lot of issues across a very broad range of territory.
Unfortunately, that's the case right now. And I can say when I started, it just seemed like there was a lot more resources, and even the priority response officers had time to do traffic enforcement. And that just added to obviously the amount of officers out there doing that. Nowadays, our officers are running from one radio call to the next, and there's always pending calls waiting for them once they clear one call. So that kind of takes away from some traffic enforcement that we used to see a lot more of.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to some of the solutions and bring you back into the conversation in just a moment. Thanks again for being part of this tonight, helping to shed some light on some of the ongoing challenges here. Goldman, let me throw it to you next, I guess, from the city's perspective, because city municipal licensing and standards, bylaw enforcement officers also theoretically anyway have a role in dealing with noise issues and noise charges. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that your team faces dealing with vehicle noise in particular? What sorts of ability does your team have to deal with charges under the bylaws when it comes to noise enforcement from cars or other vehicles?
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't want to talk about, so our noise bylaw is kind of written to more of a neighbor-ish type. So, it's like if someone's loitering at Yonge Street, so at Tim Hortons, for example, that's more of a loitering public, police type matter. But if we're talking about vehicles, the biggest part about vehicles we have for bylaw side of things is we have no power to pull over vehicles. Okay, so, and that is why we have to use police assistance, whether it's, in this case, 32 or from traffic. That's why we have them as partners. They would do the initial type enforcement, and then we come in. So I'll talk about two parts. I'll talk about motorcycles first, because motorcycles does have a decibel limit. Okay, so that's the good part, 92 decibels, dBA. So we do our test for motorcycles during these blitzes with traffic services. Okay, so there are plotted locations throughout the city that have obviously, and have data for us to do that. So I wanted to just kind of stress on the staff sergeant's aspect of making these complaints, whether it's the 311 or whether it's through the core system. Because it's important for me and my policy or my team to if I'm going to do if we're going to plan something in a certain area, we kind of need the data to back it up as well too. So I hope that kind of makes sense. And a more vehicle aspect type of things, like I said, we have this one phrase in the bylaw called point of reception. So, in short, that is where the person is disturbed. So most usually is their property, right? Their condo unit, their backyard, etc. So, let's talk about the unnecessary noise aspect, such as like honking, revving, squealing of tires, and it has to be audible at the point of reception. So we would have to attend that person's property to kind of hear it, right? So that's the part that makes our job difficult. And I would want to stress that just the very definition of noise itself is someone has to be disturbed. So we can't just walk out and just start, as a city official, we're at that side where I cannot be disturbed by the noise, right? Somebody else has to. So therefore, a lot of times these situations will come in, they would be witnesses if needed, that required to be testified against whoever it is that we could be potentially charging. And there's one aspect we also get a lot for vehicle wise is people fixing their cars, modifying them on their driveways, etc. So that's time based. Okay, so it's just so what the times are. Cannot repair, rebuild, modify, test a vehicle. That's clearly audible at this point of reception from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next day, except for 9 a.m. on Sunday, Saturday, and statutory holidays. So those are more time based. So whether it's your shop, whether it's a local shop in the area, or whether it's a neighbor, for example, who likes to window with their cars or motorcycles. With that being said, a lot of these, let's say shops, for example, you'll see some shops they might close at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. But like I said, it depends on the facility. It's noise. Remember, it's coming from noise. That never said that you cannot fix your car. It's just you cannot make noise from it, right? So I want to make that very clear because we do get calls of, oh, my neighbor's fixing their car.
So Goldman, let me just jump in and maybe sort of pull one piece out of what you just said. I think that might be helpful for listeners because, certainly speaking as a Willowdale resident, the issue of audible at the point of reception is frankly frequent, right? And I'm guessing that most that are on this session tonight are all too familiar with having very audible noises, sometimes to an extreme, in their bedrooms in the middle of the night as they're trying to sleep and trying to figure out, what do I do with that? You had mentioned something, I think Staff Sergeant Collin had mentioned something similar about responses, coming from, a data-driven analytic approach, from your end, calling 311, from the policing end, filing a report, either through their website or through the division, giving our enforcement teams the data that this is an issue. It is coming up in the community often. Is that ultimately what you're saying? Is it helpful to get from residents those sorts of complaints and issues so that you can respond accordingly?
Yes, definitely. Let's face it. If a vehicle's driving down, whether it's a group of motorcycles or a group of cars, just going southbound on Yonge Street just to hit the 401, right? That, yes, it probably woke you up, but on understanding that it was 15, maybe 10 seconds at that time, right? So it's very hard for even for police to respond. For us to respond, we're not a dispatch-based type system. So it's not you call 311 and I dispatch an officer out. It unfortunately doesn't work that way. It's just the way our unit's set up. That's why I always stress on repetitive, ongoing issues, right? Instead of a one-off issue that happens. That goes for all noise complaints. Versus construction. If there's a condo going up, it's going to happen, right? So I mean, in your area, councillor, there's quite a few condos going up. If they're going beyond their times constantly, or not having the proper permits to do certain things, right? That's the stress we're talking about. So
all right. Thanks for that. Mitch Tebow, you're one of the guys that has been looking at, I guess, the successes and challenges that have come from some of the bylaw updates that we were talking about in 2019. In terms of successes and ongoing challenges, what's been coming up in the reviews that you've been doing? Are the things that came out of that bylaw that have been positive, and what are the other things that, from your perspective, still need significant attention?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think as we kind of talked about the data piece, particularly on 311 data, and we do have an ability to kind of categorize different types of noise and see where complaints are coming from. The issue with the past couple of years is that we have data, we know where complaints are coming from, but there were points that we weren't able to enforce the bylaw itself, due to provincial limitations. So I think that's kind of significant kind of gap in why we're waiting to do a full assessment of the bylaw until next year, is that we want to make sure we have the proper data to tell us where we're getting more complaints, where some of those trends are coming from. And I think the other thing is, given, bars and restaurants and patios, especially for this summer, will be open kind of without restrictions. We want to see what that kind of does for some noise trends as well. But I would say overall, in the last year, 2021, the majority, I think over 50% of the noise complaints that came into 311 were related to amplified sound. So I think during that 2023 review, we'll definitely take a look at, whether those decibel limits are working, what residents think about, how the processes are going. And I think we also plan to do some pretty broad public consultation to hear more and specific experiences from people about what they think about the bylaw and how it's been working, and then make any changes accordingly.
All right. Now, John, you were one of a series of councillors that have moved motions over the last few years, calling for specific types of review to the noise bylaw. When it comes back to council, there's a report coming up. Are you able to speak to a couple of the requests that you made back in 2020 at council to sort of set up some of the things that you're looking for when this comes back?
Well, I'm hoping that Mitch and his colleagues can find examples in other jurisdictions where something has worked, new technologies, or recommend, maybe we need a change in laws and regulations. We may need to petition the province to do some of that. If, for example, there's a noise limit on motorcycles and now we're getting a lot more complaints about cars, maybe there needs to be some decibel limit on cars, and we need some devices that can measure that and perhaps issue tickets on the spot, much as we are able to now do in an automated way for speeding. So I think, with new problems, we need new solutions.
All right. So, Mitch, I'm going to come back to you and put you on the spot a little bit, because I know the upcoming report's not published yet and may not be quite finished yet, but maybe that creates an opportunity for us to influence that process a little bit with the conversation tonight. So John talks a little bit about sort of the notion of automated enforcement. I know, speaking to residents in the community, the Young Corridor Condominium Association in particular in Willowdale has got a team looking at some of this stuff, and we've had a few discussions in the past. There have been pilots in other jurisdictions. I think probably the best publicized one was the city of Edmonton that was toying with automated enforcement, and I know that there were a lot of challenges with that. maybe without giving us too many specifics, can you give us a sense of what your research has uncovered in terms of what's been happening in other jurisdictions, how municipalities are maybe thinking outside of the box to find technological solutions to those issues, and what we might need to look at to see some of those implemented here?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So this report in coming in May will touch on a lot of this research. So I know you mentioned the Edmonton case, and we had the opportunity to have a chat with their enforcement team and learn about some of the pilots that they pursued. I think they've been working on this issue since 2016 and have tried a bunch of different strategies. I think, in the report, we'll kind of go through a lot of the different considerations for implementing such technology. And what we have heard from a lot of other jurisdictions is that, none of these jurisdictions have an automated system yet. The technology is kind of, I wouldn't say in its infancy, but there is a lot of issues with enforcement officers having to kind of go manually through a lot of the evidence. And there are a lot of, I would say, regulatory kind of obstacles to, not only getting all the information that you need, like the license plate of a car, and also just being able to properly enforce. And kind of the automated aspect is where we kind of see a lot of challenges. And I would say just on the automated speed enforcement, I know our transportation services team with the City of Toronto here enforces that. And when they implemented that a few years ago in school and community safety zones, I think the technology was well developed globally. There was a lot of other jurisdictions that were using it. And there were regulatory amendments that the province was pursuing in the Highway Traffic Act. So I think our report will kind of go through all the research that we've done, kind of lay out, the feasibility of introducing some of these technologies, as well as some of the higher level things that would need to happen to implement them. If that answers your question, but yeah, if you have any more specifics, let me know.
Right, and we'll drill down for as many details as we can find.
Sure.
I know one of the issues in Alberta was that there was a regulatory issue in that the municipality couldn't legally issue tickets from the noise detectors that it was using. So my understanding, and you can correct me if I've got this wrong, but they had cameras and noise detectors that were triggering those cameras, but they didn't necessarily have the legal ability to send a ticket following an infraction. And I'm wondering, whether we're in a similar situation in Ontario, that even if we had a noise detection system with a camera in place, whether we would be legally allowed as a city to issue tickets.
That's a really great question. I think, that legal authority is complicated. I'm not sure if it is there for Ontario. I will just add that specific to the case in Edmonton, beyond, the video of an offending vehicle not being kind of solid enough to be used as evidence, they did have a lot of issues with even identifying, which vehicle was making the sound. A lot of this equipment isn't able to kind of detect multiple lanes of traffic. A lot of their cameras picked up city buses, picked up emergency services and ambulances, which we all know are kind of exempt from a lot of the noise requirements and regulations in Toronto because of their public safety aspect. So I think there are a lot of limitations to this equipment currently. And I have another point that I had in my mind that has so quickly left. But if I think of it, I'll mention it.
And my understanding of the Edmonton experiment, because of the lack of connection with enforcement, you had residents in that community racing by these cameras, trying to see how loud a reading they could register. It became a bit of a competition amongst some of the drivers, unfortunately, and ended up making the problem worse.
Right, and that's actually the point that was on my mind that I forgot, was that, part of Edmonton's pilot was these LED decibel boards that would kind of, as the car passed, would give a reading, but that kind of encouraged people to, see what the maximum limit was for this LED system. So they kind of quickly took down that equipment. But I will just kind of echo something that Councillor said, is that, you know, finding innovative solutions to these problems is a really important thing. And I think we will definitely continue to like assess this and kind of include all of our research in that report, so we can kind of discuss, you know, its relevance to the issues that we see in Toronto. So.
All right. Another question that John had asked in his motion had to do with regulating auto body shops, mechanics in the city of Toronto. You know, whether it would be feasible as a condition of business licensing to rule out any modifications to vehicles that would have the express purpose of amplifying noise. Is that something that your team has looked at? Will the report speak to that kind of feasibility?
Mm-hmm, yeah, our report will definitely speak to that motion on kind of working with car repair facilities. So municipal licensing and standards, you know, through our licensing bylaw does, you know, license some car repair facilities. I think, you know, part of the issue is that is also, you know, authority. I think, you know, the Highway Traffic Act does prohibit, you know, like modifying your muffler and your exhaust, and you know, as a condition of licensing, you know, these facilities are required to abide by, you know, local and provincial regulations. But I think there are some strategies, you know, that will lay out about how to work with these facilities to make sure they're educated and informed, that, you know, of these provincial regulations, that, you know, is prohibited to kind of modify your muffler for it to make more noise. So that will definitely be touched on in the report. And yeah. A great thing to think about.
All right, terrific. Just before we get to our Q&As, I just also want to touch for a moment on some speed enforcement. Speeding and vehicle noise, of course, are not the same thing, but you know, we do have a few more tools in the toolbox to deal with some of that than we do with noise issues at the moment, for better or worse. I wonder if perhaps I can bring Staff Sergeant Collin back on for a moment to talk about some of the efforts from the Toronto Police Service on the live enforcement side of speeding enforcement in the neighborhood, and then I'll get Councillor Filion and John to speak a little bit about some of the automated enforcement that the city's been advancing as well. And then we're going to go to your questions. So get ready for that. Raise your hand if you have something you'd like to ask. We've got a number in the Q&A box. So after we talk about the speeding portion, we're going to go to our audience.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
So as for speeding, it's a lot more cut and dry for us. And we have defined limits, and we have the equipment needed to say that the limits have been exceeded. So we do a lot of speed enforcement along Yonge Street. There's a couple areas that we get a lot of complaints at, and these complaints are important because then we can deploy our resources appropriately based on the complaints we're getting. So again, just want to encourage everyone to report straight to our core system. That helps me deploy the officers much easier. Again, yes, so speeding is a ticket that's probably, I think, the most written one under the HTA in our division anyways. And Yonge Street is definitely probably, I think the most enforcement happens along Yonge Street as far as speeding in 32 division. So we're out there doing that. Again, 3 officers, so we're doing as much as we can.
All right. And my understanding is there have been a couple of enforcement blitzes sort of through that corridor. Can you give us a sense? I mean, is that, you know, is it a regular part of the rotation? Have there been times where you know, you've done blitzes in the area, and if so, what the results of that sort of activity has been?
Yes, we had the meeting prior, your office and 32, and right after that we did do an enforcement blitz along Doris, Young, and Beecroft. And I don't have the numbers on me right now. I know I sent them to you, but it was a very successful one. and we do keep it on the. I think those three streets have received the most enforcement combined than any other streets in 32 Division. So it's always on our schedule, our rotation.
Great. Well, we're going to get the audience to keep sending in those complaints so we can keep with that trend. That would be terrific. All right, and John, maybe we can come back to you before we go to the audience. The city's also been advancing a number of automated enforcement tools. Are you able to speak to that for a moment in terms of where that's gone over the last couple of years?
Sure. Well, I think we had a major breakthrough earlier this year when we got through a motion to designate seniors zones as community safety zones, meaning that they qualify for automated speed enforcement. And, we know people speed on these streets, Doris, Beecroft, Yonge Street. We know, as Sergeant Collin has said, that their resources are limited, and there simply aren't enough police officers at the moment to give out as many tickets as we would like. So if we really want to have traffic safety and pedestrian safety, we need to use automated enforcement. And we also voted to increase the number per ward from 2 to 3, and to make more streets, namely the streets that are the biggest problem, eligible for them. And also these automated cameras collect a lot of data, which then I assume can be very useful to Sergeant Collins and his staff in pinpointing not only where people are speeding, but at what times they tend to speed, so that we can send an officer out to catch them. And of course, there's no substitute for that. With the automated tickets, the owner of the car is ticketed and they pay a fine. But when a police officer stops you for speeding, especially if you're going at a high speed or if you're doing it continually, that's going to affect your insurance. And that's going to cost you a lot more than a traffic ticket. And if you do it often enough, you could lose your license. So there's really no substitute for the police officers, but as much data as we can get, as much deterrent as we can get through automated enforcement is what we need to concentrate on.
And John, one of the conversations at council when the program was expanded, both in terms of number of cameras and in locations, was the limit on how many tickets could be processed by the courts. And that at the moment remains a significant bottleneck in terms of how many cameras could be deployed at any particular time. Can you speak to that for a moment as well?
Well, my personal view is that we need a change in regulations there to allow those to be given, much like a parking ticket, that it is it's not so easy to dispute. I think we just need a way of giving out the fines without bogging down our court system.
And so council did take the position to make a formal request to the province to allow those tickets to be issued in a similar manner to the way parking tickets are done. So there still would be a process of dispute, but the courts would be less clogged with those cases as they go through. I'm seeing we may have lost John's feed there for a moment, but that's okay. We'll try to get him back. There he is. And in the meantime, I think we are going to wrap up our internal conversation here, having reviewed some of the big issues on the table, and go to the audience and see if there are any follow-up questions or questions that are sort of deeper on any of those particular issues. I'm going to ask Carol. I think Carol is going to be my helper here, whether we are seeing any hands that are raised. Again, if you haven't had a chance yet, look for that hand icon on the left-hand side of the screen, and you can speak live or just put a question right into the Q&A box, and we can read it out to the panel and answer it that way.
We do have a number of questions that were asked in the Q&A box, so thank you for that, and hopefully we'll get to those this evening. No hands raised we have one hand. Are we ready to go to Laura?
Sure, we can go to Laura.
Okay, Laura, you are up.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can. Go right ahead.
Just curious. I've always wondered, I've lived here for 16 years and it is getting noisier and noisier. I'm on the 24th floor of 7 Lorraine, which is at Yonge and Finch. So I hear the street racing, albeit very brief sometimes, because I think they know that they're going to be in more risk of being caught if they go longer. So they just gun it for very short periods of time, but they do the whole area, so I can hear them even in the distance. It wakes me up. The gunfire from some of these cars, the back, whatever you call that noise that sounds like gunfire going off, is really disconcerting. It's very scary and disturbing. But I was wondering, this is a high density residential area. Would it be possible to get city approval or something to put up a sign in all the intersections, right from the highway up to Steeles, possibly saying high density residential area, quiet zone, be quiet residential area, similar to what they do downtown in the hospital zone? Would that be possible? Posting signs, would that help?
I'm going to throw that to Mitch first. Are you aware of anything like that other than the quiet zones near the hospitals that's been done in the city or anywhere else for that matter?
I'm not aware of that. No, and I do think the Transportation Services Division would maybe have some more information on that in particular. But I will just add, I think on the stunt driving and racing piece. I know that I think it was around last summer that the province increased some of the penalties for stunt driving in the Highway Traffic Act. So, I mean, some encouraging news for, when these offenders are caught, that they will, face some stricter penalties than before. But I'm also happy to loop back with, our transportation services folks about, some of the rules for signage and when and where they're put up.
And just to expand on that, I mean, as you mentioned, the fines and penalties, I think of the 401 in some locations, for example, where you have those fines posted. If there are particular trouble spots, might be worth speaking to transportation services about. So I think that may be an example of something off the beaten trail a little bit, and hard to know how effective it would be without piloting it and then looking at the data, but something certainly to take back and consider. Any thoughts from you on that, John?
No, I'm always open to new ideas. However, I think the people who are speeding and doing obnoxious things, driving on Beecroft, Doris, and Young, know they're driving in a high density area, know they're disturbing people, and I'm not sure they're going to stop doing that because there's a sign. And if you put up too many signs, then people start to, you have a bit of sign pollution, and people pay less attention to the signs just because there's, a sea of them. So, always something to look at, but I'm not sure that would work, unfortunately.
I guess that goes back to the example from Edmonton, where you had the digital responsive signs going up, measuring speeds, and it just caused people to try to go even louder through the neighborhood to see who could get the highest noise registered. So, I think that's a fair point that many of the offenders probably know what they're doing, and that's part of the fun, quote unquote, unfortunately. But I think, one of the things that we're dealing with in tackling this issue is that there is no perfect answer. There's no silver bullet, which is why we have various facets of the city teams and police all with us tonight, trying to talk from their own perspectives, where they can chip away at some of these issues and try to find solutions that are maybe a little bit more creative. All right, Carol, I'm going to send it back to you for our next question.
We have Ravi up next. Go ahead. You are unmuted.
Yeah, hi there. I'm a resident at 65 Spring Garden Avenue, which is on the corner of Doris and Greenfield, where there are traffic lights. And so I have two comments. So I've been living here also for 16 years, and I've noticed also the increase in speeders and also the loud exhaust. However, I found that when the electronic speed signage went up, it seemed to actually have a good effect on not all, but many drivers. It's easier to cross Doris in the evening when taking a walk because of these electronic signs. So my other comment is, because it's quite expensive for officers to respond, and it's also, there's a delay because when there is loud traffic, the officer obviously cannot be there at instantly. So I feel personally that the signage would actually would be an inexpensive way to help reduce the possibility of having more loud traffic on this on this street.
Well, I think that's an absolutely fair comment, and again, why I think there's been that effort to look at some of the speed enforcement, both reminders, so the watch your speed signs that are displaying driver speeds for the ones that are trying to adhere to the rules, as well as having the speed enforcement cameras. One of the locations we had about a year ago was on Doris Avenue, just north of where your condo is, Ravi. But up until now, the requirement has been that those have had to be placed in school zones, and that did limit us in terms of where they could be located around Yonge Street, Doris, Beecroft, which are not the only streets in Willowdale that have issues, but certainly the highest density of population around them. As we have had the comments tonight, clusters of data have shown that those streets in particular are challenging. So with the new interpretation by council to designate senior safety zones as community safety zones, that should make most of Doris, Beecroft, and that stretch of Yonge eligible for the automated enforcement. So we see that as a productive step. The signs, I think, is certainly something, as we've talked about, we can discuss a little bit further and try to figure out, what the research tells us in terms of the effectiveness, and if they can be effective. I think it's certainly worth taking a look at.
We have Sally up next. Good evening, Sally. You are unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you. You mentioned YCCA before, and we've been working on this for some time. And we thank the TPS for their support. We've met with them on 2 occasions. And you've talked about automated sound enforcement and about regulating garages and that sort of thing. I like the idea of signs because I think a lot of people don't realize, they think of Yonge Street as a commercial area. They don't realize that up top, there are thousands of people living, and the officer's exactly right when he says that the sound bounces off the buildings. My question was about, I noticed when Cafe TO was on last year, the speed was reduced to 40 kilometers per hour, and that helped somewhat. Will that be happening again this year?
John, do you know if that change was limited strictly to Cafe TO?
I believe it was. Personally, I would love to see it be permanent for the whole stretch of Yonge Street. Not everybody would agree with that, but I think it was just because when you have people eating in at tables out in the curb lane, it just became especially dangerous to have cars whizzing by there. So that was the rationale for the temporary speed reduction.
All right. And I may ask if we can bring up Sergeant Collin again. I know there has been discussion between TPS and the BIA now in the neighborhood along Yonge Street to encourage more speed enforcement around the Cafe TO program. So I'm curious, I guess, from the perspective of police, whether that those sidewalk cafes, curb lane cafes were on the radar as part of the enforcement strategy last summer, and whether they will be again this summer.
Absolutely, it was. Like the councillor mentioned, people out there right beside the street. So it was a very big priority of ours to ensure the safety of everyone out there. The 40-kilometer speed limit was pretty helpful as well as far as enforcement. Yeah, I could get the numbers, but I know that there was quite a few speeding tickets written in relation to the Cafe TO and the 40 speed limit.
All right. Thanks for that. Carol, back to you.
We have Sandra up next. Go ahead.
Hi. I put a question in the question box as well about the parking lot that's in the corner, northeast corner of Young and Empress, in behind the stores there. And in the summer, mostly on the weekends, we get a lot of, I overlook that parking lot. So I speak from firsthand experience. We get a lot of cars just parking in there, revving their engines and, outdoing one another with their radios on blasting. And I haven't reported it. And I guess that's what I have to do. But I've also seen drug deals going down in that parking lot. They happen real fast. They pull in, there's a little exchange, and they pull out. I just wondered if some areas like that, if the police are aware of them, if they could be regularly monitored. Or I know it's private property almost. It's a green pea lot, but just wondered about your reaction.
That's a great question, and sometimes there are a lot of nuances to these things. So I think you've raised a great example that's not cars actively speeding up and down the street, and we do see a lot of those sorts of examples. So I may ask Goldman first, and then we can ask Sergeant Collin from the policing perspective. Here we have an example of a parking lot that's maybe seen to have regular times where vehicles may park and just compete with each other to see how loud they can rev their engines. I've certainly seen that myself in the neighborhood. How would we go about dealing with that from the bylaw enforcement side? Is that something that your team could respond to in a case where you're not actually having to pull the cars over, that it may be one location that's identifiable and cars that are stationary?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we have dealt with, actually something similar to it. But like I said, the biggest, toughest question on that part is, especially on our end, is say they are revving and we can prove the excessiveness of it. A big part of that is also coming to court. So I know you're speaking about drugs. I'm not, that's not something our unit kind of deals with, right? So if it kind of comes to a criminal element, that is more of a police side of things. With that being said, I don't know what the police kind of, this looks like it's mainly loitering, right? Loitering, the noise is the cause of the loitering, right? But being a green pea parking lot, yes, it's private, but it's also, the municipality does own the green pea. So I'm not sure what the TPS kind of aspect of them going on, but Sergeant, I'm not sure if you can fill in on that. But on my end, say it wasn't a green pea parking lot, say it was more, we could engage, obviously. Actually, we have in the past, actually, for green pea was, just to have their unit, if they, they're not paying patrons, right? They still, you got paying for parking, right? Versus somebody legitimately having, eating on Yonge Street, going back to the cars, so yeah, I believe even the Green P officers, or they're the ones that issue the parking tickets on their end, might need to liaise with police if it's going to be an escalated issue on that. But for a lot of, let's say, private parking lots, certain ones I can think of, we do talk with building management or their management to kind of, they will take the first step before the city kind of steps in on that. So, if there is something that if people do notice, reaching out, we or you can reach out to their own management. Especially if it's a corporation, they should have some type of strategy to respond to public complaints. Okay.
Yeah, I think, and we'll come to the police enforcement side of it as well, because certainly if we're dealing with drug deals, that's a different thing altogether. But coming back to making sure that we've got reports to 311, and again, if it's that regular kind of issue, connecting with our office, connecting with John's office is helpful, so we can help coordinate some of the different elements, whether it's Green P staff, whether it's parking enforcement, bylaw enforcement. Sometimes there's that kitchen sink approach where you sort of just try to throw as many things at it as you can think of, because everybody's got limited resources, and you hope that one of those gets some traction. We had a conversation on our end with TTC staff earlier this week about similar issues in the commuter lot at Finch Station, and cars going in there and sort of doing donuts and just sort of tooling around, but in a similar way, creating a lot of noise and trying to figure out sort of what jurisdiction that fell into, and whether we could get TTC staff involved in that enforcement. So there are a lot of different conduits. Once stuff gets reported, especially if it's reported regularly, and we can establish those patterns, that gets us started. But maybe from Sergeant Collin's perspective, when we're talking about other types of illegal activity, what are the types of things that just from the public can help add a location to a patrol route, or is there a process of doing that?
So if we're talking about outside of the Highway Traffic Act, and like in this case, drugs, an email to me is a great place to start. I am in charge of the community response guys too, and we get this all the time. And what we'll do with a drug complaint like that is we'll watch the area. You won't see us. We'll be there. We're just going to assess what we think is going on there, and if it warrants further investigation, we will commence it with our major crime unit and end up making an arrest usually. As for the guys revving their cars, that's something I want to hear about as well. In the parking lot, there's a lot of avenues we can take there. We also get this a lot. Usually takes one conversation from us to them and they don't come back. But if they do, there's multiple avenues we can take, anywhere from trespassing. We'll talk to Green P and whoever else may be responsible for the property and get certain people trespassed, and then we can act under the Trespass to Property Act. If it becomes an even more ongoing issue and they're just not abiding by any kind of restrictions, we can move into the criminal realm of mischief, interfering with use, enjoyment of property. So there's things we can do. We usually resolve those kinds of issues, so I just need to know about it. I'd like to get my email address out there for everyone listening. I don't know if we can share it in the chat. I don't have access to the chat.
Fair enough. I'll see if we can get Carol and Jesse to do that, because I think that they have access to that. We can maybe put it up into an answer box there. Of course, if anybody's having trouble reaching Sergeant Collin, by all means, reach us as well at the councillor's office, councillor_Filion at toronto.ca.
I'll just point out too that Green P is a branch of the city and tends to be much more responsive than if it was a private commercial parking lot operator.
Absolutely. So we would have a few more tools to try to approach that kind of a situation in that sort of location.
So sorry, if the person who asked that question can reach out to me, dates, times that are most frequent, and exact location in the parking lot, and we'll definitely look into that.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Carol, back over to you.
We have Randall up next. Hello, good evening. Randall?
Are you able to hear me at all? I'm not.
There you are. We can hear
Okay,
you now.
yes, sorry about that. No, this is just a bit of a follow-up question about like the loud backfiring noise that we all can hear. And it seems to be, you know, getting to be a bit more prominent. It's getting louder, is definitely what I've been seeing, even just the, you know, the beginning of the spring. And I know a lot of this stuff comes from things like anti-lag systems, which are actually a lot of cars, a lot of manufacturers actually provide that with some, in many performance cars. And some are obviously are aftermarket, but you know, has this sort of system or this sort of, you know, is it sort of on the radar on the sort of the you know, policy end? Is it sort of, is it kind of getting to be an issue or something that you would see as an additional form of noise?
So I guess just to repackage that, Randall, and let me know if I've got this right. The question is more a regulatory one in terms of the manufacturing of the vehicles themselves. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, more or less. It just seems that there's, you know, a lot more of this sort of this type of noise, and it's just wondering, yeah, it's sort of like, you know, noise policy. Individuals are sort of starting to look into this a little bit further. Yeah.
So Mitch, I'm going to toss that over to you. I mean, I think we're going to get into sort of multi-jurisdictional stuff in terms of level of government, but you know, from your perspective, I mean, are you hearing sort of an uptick in concern about sort of how vehicles are manufactured or altered, and you know, how we deal with that as a municipality?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know. I mean, generally, if you are driving a car properly under this, like under or at the speed limit, and you are behaving properly, you know, there's not going to be motor vehicle noise. But I think Golden can confirm we have heard cases of, you know, vehicles that are potentially modified that, you know, do make noise. I think this is a bit of a difficult jurisdictional issue. I think, as we mentioned, the Highway Traffic Act does, you know, require that every motor vehicle has, you know, a muffler that's in good working order, and that doesn't create excessive noise. So I think there is, you know, some engagement that we can do with the province to ensure that, you know, cars are properly sent off of from the manufacturers as well. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we've fully answered that question, but you know, my guess is that the bottom line is that we don't have a lot of tools at the city level to be tackling those sorts of regulatory issues. You know, we would be relying on provincial counterparts, or even possibly federal counterparts to address some of those issues.
Yeah, that sums it up well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Carol, back to you.
We have Mark up next. Mark, good evening. Mark, you are unmuted. Oh. Oh. Don't think Mark is able to get to us, but
All right.
there are some cues in the Q&A box if you want to get to those.
Yeah, absolutely. If there are some that we haven't tackled yet, I think that would be great as well.
Sure. Okay. So there was one in particular. I could get to that. Sorry. For the good sergeant. The Sergeant Collin mentioned a successful excessive noise and aggressive driving campaign. What did that involve? What did the success look like, and how can it be repeated?
All right, Sergeant Collin, sounds like that one's for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the service did a citywide campaign, I think 2 weeks ago now. It was called Speed Kills, and it was focused on speeding and aggressive driving related offenses. I do have the numbers here. So there was 4,142 speeding offenses where tickets were laid, 1,152 aggressive related driving tickets. So following too closely, weaving in and out of traffic. Red light would probably be considered aggressive driving, things like that. There was 213 distracted driving charges. They have other as 1,866 tickets issued and 30 stunt driving tickets issued. That was a week-long campaign 2 weeks ago. So that's a citywide campaign such as that has to come from our command, right down from the chief. And we are then directed to provide resources for this campaign across the whole service. Traffic services gets involved. They're obviously our biggest resource for this kind of thing. And there's multiple campaigns throughout the year around school, when school starts, all sorts of different names. I can't really think of them right now, but all you have to do is reach out to the Office of the Chief. If you're looking for a particular kind of campaign, you can find the email on online on our website. And that's how the campaigns work.
That's great. Thank you, Sergeant. I did find a question in the Q&A box from Mark. I think this is probably the question he had wanted to ask when he raised his hand. He writes, I live on Empress Avenue and believe much of the overflow from Yonge Street spills over onto Willowdale Avenue, north-south routes, with regards to speeding, high noise levels. Given that Empress Avenue is so close to Earl Hague and St. Gabriel schools, having speed bumps, quote unquote, installed have they been considered to protect the children walking along the sidewalks?
John, I'm going to toss that one over to you, just without anybody from Transportation Services, to see if you want to chime in on that.
A couple of things. If I'm correct in my recollection, collector roads and Empress is a collector road, and then higher categories above that of roads, such as Doris, are not eligible for speed bumps. Were that not the case, or if I'm incorrect about that with Empress, certainly you couldn't put speed bumps on on streets like Willowdale Avenue. That for sure is an arterial road, a minor arterial road. On Empress, could you perhaps, if the resident wants to check into our office, we'll verify whether Empress is eligible, and if it is largely up to the residents of the street whether or not they wish to have that kind of traffic calming. So far, I can't think of a single instance where the residents of a street have wanted to create speed bumps to the point that they've gone in. They do work. If people are willing to put up with them. They also have their downsides, such as they delay ambulances about, I think the last time I looked at the data, it was about 6 seconds each. So a street like Empress, to get into some of the neighboring streets, you need to take a street like Empress because the others are closed off. So, it has implications for, for people who aren't living on Empress. So it does get kind of tricky. But if the resident wants to contact our office, we'll certainly get a more specific answer to them on that.
Terrific. Thanks, John. I think we're going to try to squeeze in one more question, and then we'll go to closing thoughts. Carol?
Right. We have a question from Craig. He says, this isn't noise related, but the intersection of Yonge and Annandale is frequently completely blocked by cars that are trying to get through the light, forcing pedestrians to wind their way through the cars. Can we put a red light camera in that intersection?
So if I'm understanding that right, I'm not sure that a red light camera is going to be an answer if cars are stopped in the intersection. That's not necessarily going to trigger the red light camera, that kind of enforcement. John, is that something you're familiar with in terms of how the red light cameras operate, in terms of cars having to actually be actively moving through an intersection to be ticketed?
That's my understanding, and I think we've had similar suggestions and complaints about that very intersection, and in and around that area. It is just a big traffic quagmire, as we know, at times of day. But yeah, no, the red light cameras are designed to catch somebody who's running a red light, like speeding through a red light. I don't know if they can be modified to catch people who kind of, move into the intersection when they shouldn't and end up blocking it. I'm sure there would be some device that could do that, and maybe we need to look at it. I know it is a very legitimate concern and problem in that area.
Yes, my understanding is that a lot of that is also regulated by the provincial laws, the Highway Traffic Act that we have referenced a few times tonight. And I know John has often done advocacy with provincial counterparts, lobbying to see the ability to have more types of traffic infractions covered through automated enforcement. Whether it's something that's currently on the market or may eventually be on the market. People often ask about stop signs as well, and people running stop signs, and what we can do about that. So it would be nice to see more technological solutions, but the province does tend to be very prescriptive in terms of what cities can and cannot do in terms of automated enforcement, and at the moment that still is quite limited. Any thoughts from you on any of that, Sergeant Collin, before we wrap up, just on sort of enforcement of other types of traffic issues?
Yeah, as far as what was just asked in that question, that's another complaint we were receiving. I haven't seen it too often lately, but a couple of years ago we did a couple of mini blitzes for that along Yonge Street. Wrote a lot of tickets. It's failed to clear signalized intersection is the charge. The problem is we can enforce it all day, every day, and something like that really isn't going to stop. I think it's more of an infrastructure issue, and I don't know if it's a backup of lights, timing wise, and things like that. But a lot of times people just find themselves there and they're stuck. And unfortunately, the enforcement aspect of it, yes, we could generate a lot of tickets, but is it going to stop the problem? No.
Fair enough. And we won't delve too much further into that tonight. We probably could have a whole other session on other types of traffic issues and traffic enforcement issues throughout the neighborhood. We've tried to stick as much as we can to the issues of street racing and noise tonight. And there are some other noise issues that we didn't even get to, things like leaf blowers that are going to be on the report, as I understand it, when it comes to committee next month. And fireworks that were at committee today, as I understand it. So there are a few of these that are coming up. We'll keep tackling those through the councillors' e-newsletter. If you're not on that mailing list, please join us at johnfilion.ca. Great newsletters that go out every 2 weeks talking about some of these sorts of issues and other events in the community. So well worthwhile signing up if you haven't. And just as we wrap things up, do we have any closing thoughts from our panel? Maybe I'll start in reverse order with Sergeant Collin and go from there.
Yeah, as far as the police side of things and the topic tonight being noise, again, to be able to help us in laying these charges related to noise, I'd like to see a standard set as far as decibel levels. And then, of course, we would need the proper tools provided, which we don't have decibel readers at all in our service. So they'd have to be readily available, especially to our traffic officers. Some more aggressive teamwork done with our partners at bylaw, maybe some campaigns to address it would be nice. And I actually had one officer, I was speaking to one of our traffic guys, and he says that when they took away the stealth cars, he found that enforcement became a little harder because he stuck out like a sore thumb on Yonge Street. But again, that's just a point he made. I thought I'd share it. Other than that, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time tonight and all your input. It's very, very much appreciated. Let's go to Goldman and then Mitch.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I'll get in touch with the sergeant as well too. If you want to do some type of coordinated projects in 32 division or in your ward, Councillor. I just want to touch on one of the, I think there's one of the questions talking about GFL, specifically, I guess, for picking up the recycling and garbage, which is loud. So that is time-based, okay? So just for the residents that are in the area regarding, loading and unloading of garbage or recycling in your condo or neighboring businesses, okay? It's 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Monday to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and stat holidays, it's 9 a.m. So if it's beyond those times and you do see or hear it, give 311 a call, and our team will handle it on that end. Okay. Other than that, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Goldman. And over to you, Mitch.
Thanks so much. And yeah, thanks so much again for inviting me to this conversation. I will just say on the report that we're bringing in May, so it's coming to the Economic and Community Development Committee on May 30th, and reports typically are I think, published a week before. In these committee meetings, if residents want to talk about their experiences with noise or any kind of content of the report, they're welcome to make a deputation. So I'll just flag that the report's coming out later in May. And yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, thanks. And last word to you, John.
Well, good job, Marcus, and thanks to all the panelists. I think a lot of areas got covered, and we may not have as you said, a magic bullet, but a lot of good discussion that could lead to us finding some better ways of tackling the problem. So thanks to you all, and thanks to the residents who tuned in tonight.
Absolutely. So once again, thanks to John and to Goldman, to Mitch, to Sergeant Collin, the whole team for joining us tonight, and to Jesse and Carol who've been working on the back end, and to all of you who have participated in this conversation. I think the one big takeaway from tonight for me is report. The squeaky wheels get most of the grease. So for all of us that are connected to condo buildings and condo boards, other stakeholders in the community, it's helpful both to the city staff and to police to have that information sent their way as often as possible, so that we can get those locations on the map and make sure that the enforcement resources are continuing to be allocated there, or increasingly to be allocated there. So with that, again, thanks to everybody. I hope you all have a great night, and join us again next week, May 2nd. Our next event in the Let's Talk Willowdale series is going to be on affordable housing, and hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody.